So this module focuses on the accounting cycle and the basic financial statements. So the main objectives here with this module is to name and describe the steps in the accounting cycle, to explain and have a general understanding of what debits and credits are, what journal entries are, the types of transactions, and what a trial balance is. We, of course, want you to be able to analyze and interpret financial statements and understand what the statement of income and retained earnings is, to understand in general terms the taxation rules for your cooperative. They're going to be all different in every province, every country, and to have a general understanding of the treatment of patronage dividends from a taxation perspective for your cooperative. So looking at how financial information is compiled, most of the information on how the financial records are generated, that is covered off in your textbook, in the online book. And it's US based, so because the textbook is US based, I update the lecture notes to include other examples where applicable. So the focus of the textbook is really to enhance your understanding of the accounting records and how they're generated through transactions. And again, just to be aware of how dividends are treated and the taxation issues. So steps in the accounting cycle, you need to be able to identify economic events and transactions. You have to be able to measure the transactions, place a value on them, record them in the system, classify them, summarize the accounting transactions, and then report them in financial statements. So as you work your way through the textbook, you will see how all of this information is compiled. Financial statement examples. So the lecture notes provides examples of financial statements of cooperatives in Canada, the US, and the UK, because they use various financial accounting standards. So when you review, think about your co-op's financial standards statements and what standards they have to adhere to. So the three examples that I'm using to illustrate and compare the for-profit, like the examples that you see in your textbook, I then look at, compare that to Land of Lakes Co-op in the US, and they're using generally accepted accounting principles. The next one I look at is Federated Co-op in Canada, and they're using International Financial Reporting Standards. And finally, I'm using the Phone Co-op in the UK, and they are using private enterprise accounting standards. So you'll see the financial statements, they look different, and for each company I'm then comparing how their statements compare to your basic for-profit commercial enterprise statements. So now, turning to the usefulness of financial statements, you need to understand, of course, what they mean in terms of what's an asset, a liability, equity. And equity is different, as you recognize, of course, for cooperatives compared to publicly listed companies, and then understanding revenue and expenses. When you're looking at your financial statements, you also have to consider the usefulness, like who is using them, from your co-op, who explains the results, who explains what they mean to the users, how are they distributed to the users, and who's taking responsibility in your cooperative for explaining the financial statements to the users. So when I say users, I'm using that in a broad sense in terms of including both members and employees and any other interested party. Okay, so now looking at the Living Lab for this module, what you're required to do here is discuss the role of financial statements in your cooperative, or it can be another cooperative of your choosing. Just indicate who it is that you're using. So there's 5 specific questions that I'm looking for you to answer in this Living Lab. We want you to indicate how the financial statements are distributed to employees and members. Is it just online? Do you have meetings? How does this work? To discuss whether or not you believe the financial statements are useful in demonstrating accountability to the members. Comment on the role of management in educating users. So some would argue that it's the responsibility of the members to become educated, but others would argue that this is the responsibility of the co-op themselves. Discuss whether you agree or disagree that members' employees are not interested in understanding the financial detail. Some people say, oh, they don't really care, but that still doesn't exempt you from the obligation to provide the information. And finally, indicate what changes you would recommend to improve your cooperative's financial reporting to its members and employees, and explain why you're making these recommendations. So that concludes Module 2.